What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to discuss how long Gotham Knights will be. This is a question. This is not, me stating the actual numbers, just in case people are confused. We have talked about this once before, I believe years ago, like plural, could be more than one. And since that time, we do have one thing to go off of, one statement from WB Montreal that basically talked about how you wouldn't be able to beat this game over a weekend. And I believe they were specifically talking about the main story. The main story is not something you can sit down and just beat simply over one weekend. Now, that doesn't give us too much, but it does give us a little. It kind of leaves it up for interpretation, right? Because one of the things I go to is, well, all right, that could be true because a weekend, all right, 2 days. But if you play like 12-hour days, if you somehow could do that, which I'm sure there are people that could, that's 24 hours. So you saying you can't beat the main story in 24 hours? Or are you saying like a casual person who plays 3-4 hours a day, right? That's only 8. No, you would not be able to beat the main story in 8 hours, right? And that's why, in my opinion, it's kind of ambiguous. So what I want to do is I want to look to Batman Arkham Knight. I actually looked at Arkham Origins first, but I think even though they didn't make Knight, right? And even though it's a different, technically, franchise in a way, but obviously Rocksteady, Arkham Knight was the last one that came out. It was the most open world of the 4 Arkham games, right? We can all agree on that. And, it's the most recent, recency bias, all that stuff. It took 16 and a half hours on how long to beat.com. That's the average to beat, 16 and a half hours. Main story plus side missions is 31. All right, that was the average for that. Then you go to completionist. Completionist, like if you get all the trophies. So for this would literally be Riddler trophies. But if you 100% the game, okay? So that's a pretty meaty game. 16 and a half hours main story, 31 main and side. That doesn't mean everybody beat it in that time. Some people beat it more. Some people beat it in less time. But that's a pretty good number. To be honest with you, my prediction for Gotham Knights was kind of around this. I think a few years ago, or whenever I last did this prediction, I think I said, if the main mission was around, main missions, I guess, plural, was around 20 hours, and then everything else was an additional 20 hours, you had 40 hours, I would call it good. Now, is that believable? I mean, I personally think it is. One example is the rumored for God of War Ragnarok, which is exactly that, 20 hours main story, 20 hours side content, 40 hours altogether. And that's the rumor that we're going to get for Ragnarok. Now, Ragnarok is not open world in the same way Gotham Knights is. Ragnarok is more linear, definitely, but I still feel like it's okay. In my opinion, Gotham Knights doesn't, and this is where we always get into controversy, right? I do not think Gotham Knights needs to be 30, 35, 40 hours for the main story. I mean, you'd be approaching, Witcher 3's average, I believe, is 51. Cyberpunk 2077, despite its problems, it's a huge game. I think it's 23 hours for the main story. So main stories, I would argue, for these open world games, the average is probably somewhere in that, let's say, 15 to 25, right? 15 definitely being on the lower end, 25 maybe being higher. Yes, you'll have those outliers that do 30, 35, 50 hours, right? You'll get those. But the average, I mean, if it came in at 20 to 25 hours, and again, I think you can make that work with their statements. If the main story of Gotham Knights is even 25 hours, you could beat that in 2 days. I don't know if I'm gonna do it, personally try it out, but you absolutely could because you split it up amongst 2 days. You dedicate those 2 days literally just to playing it. You can beat it. I don't think that's what they were talking about when they issued that quote. I think they truly meant, if you put in a couple hours here and there, you're not going to be able to beat it over a weekend. I don't know if they meant, if you play 15 hours both days, you sleep the other, you sleep a little, you eat, and then you play this game for 2 days straight, you still won't beat the main story. No, I think you will. I honestly think you would be able to do it. Now, the side stuff, right, the side missions, and that's, I guess, another part to this, right? So I've always said kind of 20. I think I'd be fine with 20 hours for the main story. Then how much for the side stuff? So the interesting thing with Gotham Knights, right, compared to maybe you think of God of War Ragnarok or God of War 2018 or whatever. So Gotham Knights, you'd expect your criminal activity stuff that's happening, but you also those dang villain, those villain missions. That's still the hang up because we don't really know. I mean, Mr. Freeze I mean, I think I've speculated maybe like 2 to 3 hours of villain, right? So maybe like the Harley Quinn villain line, if you just did her missions, which includes you playing it, like you getting from point A to point B, you fighting the enemies you need to, detective work, whatever, and then fighting her, right? The entire cutscenes, all that stuff. If that took 3 hours per side villain, I think that's kind of fair. And so, I mean, if you have only 3, that's 9. That's 9 hours right there. We know there's other factions in the game, so you're going to be able to fight their leader. Is that connected to the main story with the Court of Owls? That's debatable, and then we don't really know how the hours would work there, right? So I guess if you had 6 villains, you are up to already like 18 hours, if you're following like just my numbers. And maybe, and they could be completely wrong, right? But if it's 3 hours a villain, 6 villains in all, 6 side villains, that's 18. And that's not counting random crimes. That's not counting like clearing out a zone in the map, which would add extra time, right? So maybe it's more. So let's say, for the sake of it, main story, I'll predict somewhere around 20, maybe 22, maybe 18, all right? Somewhere in that range. And then for the side stuff, I wouldn't be shocked if we're talking about upwards of the high 20s. So 28, maybe up to 30, right? I wouldn't be surprised, which would get you, if you really did even numbers, 20 hours main story, 30 hours side stuff, 50 hours. I mean, I would call that perfectly fine. Yet again, I'm somebody, and I've said this multiple times, I don't need my open world games or any of my games to, like, they don't need to be 100, 150 hours. I have played them. Persona 5 took me, I think, 98 hours to beat. That's a long time. I'm not disappointed in the time I put in, but I don't think every game needs to be 98 hours, right? If you can do what you need to do in, let's say, Arkham Knight's time of, what would that be, like 47 and a half hours? Could you do, is that acceptable, playing Arkham Knight for 47 and a half hours? I think it is. I think it is. So if you could do Gotham Knights and I would honestly put it lower. I'd say 40 hours is probably the minimum to do everything. If it's below 40 to do everything the game has to offer, that probably is a pretty small open world by 2022 standard, right, of what an open world game is. So probably that 45 to 55. If we could get it somewhere in that 45 to 55 hour mark, I would say that's perfectly acceptable and in line with, games like Arkham Knight, let's say, of 7 years ago, but also modern games. Again, they don't need to be Horizon. Those games are not that gigantic. You don't need to put in 100, 150 hours for Horizon, so those are just some examples, obviously, but that's where I would put it. So definitely want to put it to you guys. What's your final prediction for, the length of time of Gotham Knights? Let me know in the comments. Make sure, as always, you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on. We've been doing a lot of Gotham Knights content, and I'm going to be continuing it really right up until the game comes out, and then slightly after as well, all right? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.